Tonight's topic is the impact of going no contact with family on mental health. And I wanted to this was actually inspired. Thank you for letting me know. This was actually inspired by somebody in my family that I have gone on again, off again in contact with them, and I was at a point in my life for a while where we had to talk because of stuff we were handling, unfortunately, together. But I'm in a place in my life where it's not my freaking problem anymore. And I guess I've sort of known this was coming for a week. And today was the day. He picked today to be, today was the day. So, anyway, so that is what inspired this conversation. And, it's really funny because when I was telling people what the topic was going to be tonight, a lot of people were like, I could relate to that. So, if you can relate to that, well, then you're in the right place. And even if you can't, maybe it'll be interesting to hear something. So real quick before we get started, I just want to ask a couple of questions because we want to get this chat hype, okay? The more people are commenting in the chat and the more you're liking my live, the better my live will perform. And I'm really trying to grow this mental health discussion because my goal is to normalize the discussion around mental health. So if you guys can put blue hearts in the chat if you're new here, blue hearts in the chat if you're new here, yellow hearts in the chat if you've been here before, yellow hearts in the chat if you've been here before. So I think going no contact with family can be one of the hardest, most misunderstood, and most life-changing decisions. And I think it's because there's a mentality where, at least when I grew up, where you had to talk to people because they were family, because you were related to them by blood, right? And I have probably stayed in contact or communicated with people who did not deserve my attention or my time long past when I should have just set a boundary, right? So, of course, life is something that we learn, grow, and evolve the entire process, right? So, I was in my late 30s, I think, before I finally realized, I don't have to talk to people if they're not good for me, And I'm not saying, we don't all make mistakes. We do, but if somebody continually says things that they know are harmful and they continue to disregard your feelings about it, then you have to question if this is somebody worth keeping in your life. And it can be really hard because sometimes the people that you have to go no contact with are going to be related to you by blood. It might be a mom, a dad, a brother, and it can be a challenge. And it's sometimes you don't have a choice because if you try to discuss with them what's on your heart, what they do that is on your heart and hurting your feelings, they don't take it seriously, then maybe you have to go no contact. And I don't think no contact should be a first resort. I definitely think it should be a last resort. I am gonna mute you just while I'm talking, but you can unmute when I'm asking questions. But anyway, it shouldn't be a first resort. It should definitely be a last resort. But you don't have to drag it out for years and years and years to just finally set boundaries. Okay, so that's just my opinion. But I think because of, especially I'm Gen X and well, I don't know, but whatever. I was raised in the 80s, okay? And so I was always taught, blood is thicker than water and all of that stuff. And you've got to you got to care because they're your family. Well, I'm in a place in my life where no, I don't have to care because they're family. And I'm not going to care just because they're family, because if you want to be in my space, you have to respect me and you have to respect my boundaries. And I'll give you a little backstory before we move a little further, okay? So I have different worldviews than some of the people in my family because we all lived in a bubble, and I went out into the world and started living and experiencing things and seeing things for what they really were. And there are people in my family who have not done that, and they don't agree with me, and that's fine. I'm open to dissent, but if I tell you continually don't, so the example really is don't discuss certain political views with me because it's going to cause an argument, and I don't want to argue with people. I would rather you just keep things to yourself. And I miss the days where people did that, to be quite honest. And somebody keeps trying to force me to see their point of view. That's going to piss me off. And that's kind of what I dealt with the last couple days. So that's what inspired this. Okay. So this discussion about going no contact is not going to be about cutting people off over petty drama. Okay. And I will tell you that might sound petty, but this is somebody who's a repeat offender. And the only reason they ever got any grace in the first place was because I didn't have a choice in the situation due to things I was going through in my life. Now I have a choice. And, so I feel like they've been granted grace that they didn't deserve the first time. So I don't have to give it a second time. Anyway, so cutting people off is over petty drama is not something I recommend. And like I said, it shouldn't be your first choice. It should really be, I can't, like, you've exhausted all of their options. You've tried talking it out with them. Okay. So this is about choosing peace over pain. Because ultimately, your mental health is going to suffer. And no matter what side you sit on, your mental health is going to suffer, right? So whether you're the person that's trying to grant them grace or continue a relationship because they're family, or whether you're the person that has to go no contact, it's going to affect your mental health. But you know what? If you have to go no contact with somebody because they don't respect your boundaries, even if it affects your mental health is still going to be in a better place than it is if you continue contact with that person. And that's just my opinion. And I think a lot of people can agree with that. So, I want this to be more of like a conversation. I don't want it to sound like a lecture. So I'm going to ask some questions. For those of you who are not on the panel, drop your answers in the chat if you're comfortable. We don't force anybody to do anything here they don't want to. If you're comfortable, if you're on the panel, we can go around and just let everybody give their opinion or whatever. That's totally fine. So the first question I'm going to ask here is, have you ever gone no contact with a family member, or have you ever thought about it? Check mark for yes, red X for no. And if you're still deciding, just put still deciding. And if anybody on the panel wants to talk about it, you can unmute yourself and give me your feedback. I would love to hear it. I have always been one who's like, you can make decisions for yourself. And even actually with my older kids, I said, and I'm sorry, I can't turn the Discord notifications off. So if you hear the beeping, it is what it is. I forgot to do that. So I told my kids basically, like, you can come to me and ask me questions about your dad, but I want you to wait until you're an adult, because I wanted them to form their own decisions. And of course their dad and I, we get along now, but there were times where it's very tumultuous. And I think, like, we have to let other people decide, but it's okay to tell them why we're not okay with somebody either. Especially somebody who hurt you. And I would really love to say what the triggering event was, but it would probably get a problem in this life. So, because the real problem was a very racially charged remark about 15 years ago. So it does look like there's a couple people who have thought about it. So I'm curious if anybody's comfortable just dropping in the chat what holds them back. And you don't have to, but I am just curious. So I think the next part that we're going to discuss is when it comes to going no contact, and I sort of talked about this earlier, is you get kind of the physical. Look at me. I took a nap for like an hour and didn't want to get up, guys. So my brain is like, go back to bed. So the first part is psychological tug of war. Going no contact is a big decision, but it's also a little bit of a mental battlefield, if that makes sense. And you can love somebody deeply and still realize that they're not healthy for you. Ironically, I think it's also possible to realize that you really don't give two rats butt about somebody, and they might be family. And I think you shouldn't have to feel guilty if they say something that you just don't agree with and you don't want to talk to them. And I'm not saying like, oh, go full no contact, but if you like never want to call them or whatever, like that's okay too. I think there's different levels of no contact. There's, I'm not going to family functions or whatever. I think where you can start without cutting people off, it's a big decision. So I'm not saying don't do it, okay? Because I'm not you. But I want you to think about if you if that is, like, if you've already exhausted all other options, right? Have you tried talking it out with them and things like that? And then I would give maybe, hey, if you don't really care about talking to me, that's fine. I just won't call you. And that way they have the breadcrumbs. But I think definitely, and I'm not saying don't do it, but definitely make sure that you are thinking about everything, because it is a big decision. And it's a decision that you don't want to waffle on, right? Because it's something that once you make the decision, you got to stand your ground. So it's not an easy decision. And I think that really ties in perfectly to the tug of war feeling, right? Because it's like, because somebody in the chat said, I'm not going to call her out by name, but one of the things she said, thank you so much, was that it's really hard when you don't have a big support system. It's really hard when you don't have a big support system if you have to go no contact with people. And I think to some degree that can also lead to isolation. So if you know you're going to have to go no contact, you have to start working on building a new support system. So that way you're not feeling like you're in a silo by yourself. And one thing I know about you, Mary Mama, is I know we just met recently, but you are starting to work on building, thank you so much for that. You are starting to work on building that circle for yourself. So I would say that no matter what you do, you're still going to have support outside of your family. And you're going to have people you can rely on and things like that. So I would say it doesn't have to be overnight. It can be a process. And as friends, we can totally talk about that, not online, if that makes it easier for you too. Because I don't want to make, like, single you out, but I also want to try to keep things going as well. So, all right. So, and I think one thing for those of us who may have been born in the 80s or earlier, forgive and forget. That was something that was huge that I used to have to hear all the time. Oh, well, you just forgive and forget. You can forgive. You don't have to forget. You can forgive somebody and never even accept their apology. You can still forgive them. To me, we're humans. We're not robots. You can't just erase the code, right? And forgive and forget almost in a way to me feels like something that can allow that behavior to continue. And because, oh, well, you're supposed to forget about it. Don't bring up the past, right? I'm not going to bring up the past, but if I see a pattern, I'm going to call it what it is. It's a pattern. And I think that forgive and forget can sometimes be almost a subtle way of somebody trying to not lose control of the situation, depending on, I know a lot of people, and I know this isn't everybody, but a lot of people who have to go no contact, it's almost always somebody who's trying to control a situation involving that person. There's a lot of gaslighting and things like that go into it as well. You guys are so amazing. My chat is hopping and popping tonight. I am loving it. I'm glad that I picked this topic because I feel like I'm really getting some good interaction here, guys. So thanks for being here. I think that it is important also to make sure that we understand cognitive dissonance. You can have two things be the truth at the same time, even if they conflict, right? You can still love somebody and they're still a butthole. And there's still a butthole who takes a toll on your mental health, right? So I think that also kind of plays into that mental tug of war that we have going on when we have to think about big decisions like this. And you might feel relief, guilt, anger, sadness. It might feel like a hilly ride or a roller coaster or something like that too, because family, especially family, can be so complicated. It can be so complicated. I think going back to forgive and forget, a lot of us were conditioned that were acceptable that really aren't acceptable as far as behaviors, actions, boundaries, and things like that. And that phrase was never designed to be a license or a free pass to just do whatever you want because, oh, they'll forgive me later. So there's that. Now, question number 2. One emotion you didn't expect to feel when you went no contact, if you've gone no contact. And for those of you who are only thinking about going no contact, what is a fear that you have about going no contact? Oh my God, that's really cute. Thank you. And the panel's open, so if you want to answer that verbally, you can unmute. Okay, so part one of the question is, if you've gone no contact, what's one emotion that you didn't expect to feel when you went no contact? And if you're thinking about going no contact, but you haven't yet, what is a fear that you have about going no contact? And I'm looking at the chat, and over 21 says remorse, regret, sadness. And I think, yeah, those are all definitely things that, you know, people are going to feel, especially if you have to go no contact with somebody who's maybe getting close to the end of their life. Sometimes that can be really hard because you feel like you should feel bad and you can't, or something like that. And I think when we care about other people more than they care about us, guilt actually works on us as a tool to keep us in those unhealthy relationships. All right, so next part, emotional fallout. What happens right after you cut contact? Well, it can feel like grief without a funeral. A few weeks ago, I talked about how I was grieving somebody who's still living because I love them, but they're a train wreck. And it's really hard to watch the train wreck. And I'm not no contact with this person. At this point, there's no reason for me to be no contact, but it's hard to love somebody who everything they do can affect your mental health because of their relationship with you. So essentially, this can carry over into going no contact. You have to grieve a relationship that's of people that are no longer alive. And I think when you think about the 5 stages of grief, right? And you're having to cut contact with somebody who's put you in this position where you even feel like you have to consider it. Kind of go through those 5 stages of grief in a way, because you're angry and you're frustrated, and then you feel sadness, and then maybe you try to bargain and work it out, and then eventually you just accept it for what it is. So I think that it's very similar to grieving. Or there comes the stage where you're just completely indifferent because you've just had enough. Right? And I think that people who experience that is normal too. May feel like they're even getting an identity shift, because I feel like sometimes if we force ourselves to be around people who don't make us happy, it holds us back from our true and authentic selves. Right? Like, it's really hard to be who you are if you're worried about being judged. And I think that's why you see sometimes when people come out of a toxic relationship or a DV relationship, they blossom into this whole different person. And they just didn't even know they had all of these things about them because they're like learning who they are. And I think it's very, very similar. If you don't have somebody rooting for you, you feel like somebody's rooting against you, you're not going to run and share, every little win or every little excitement, because there's nothing more frustrating than going to somebody and feeling like it's a pissing contest, right? And I say this because I was talking with a cousin yesterday about how, like, sometimes he quit going to family events years ago. And one of the things he said was, it just felt like a big gossip session. Let's just all go to dinner. And everybody's trying to compete, like, who has the better story, who has the better job, who has, more money and stuff like that. And I think, like, that opened my eyes. And I remember thinking years ago, God, he's so rude. Why can't he just go to family functions? That's, like, so rude. And then it's like the last 5 or 6 years is like, oh my God, I get it now. He was like, this isn't conducive to the type of environment I want to be around. And we tend to take on the traits of the people we have in our community. And I think if we're around somebody who's always negative, it's going to be really hard for us to be successful. If we're around successful people, whether they're just starting on their journey or whether they're further on their journey than us, then we're gonna start seeing those same results too. And I think, like, we are who we surround ourselves with to a certain degree. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on that on the panel? And over 21, if you want to come up, I'd love to have you. I think a lot of people get so used to seeing things like that. Like me, I was in this bubble where, like, I was just so used to it, I didn't understand what the big deal was, right? Experience anxiety, sleepless nights, guilt that sneaks up out of nowhere. Some people are going to feel relief, and I think you talked about that a little bit, Tara, that you felt relief. It can be disorienting, and I think that's what can lead sometimes to that. I don't want to say personality change, because I don't think it's personality change. I think it's personality growth, because they were always that person. They just couldn't be that person around whoever. What do you think is the hardest part after going no contact, or what was the hardest part of going no contact with somebody? And I think even people who are adjacent to us, right? So if we're in a relationship with somebody and it's toxic and we have to go no contact with them, right? Or we're related to somebody and having a relationship with them is toxic. Like that absolutely makes sense, because they're dimming your light, and you want to be this person, but you're this person because you either don't want to hear it or they cut you down when you share it. Healing can look like, well, I think going no contact can be part of healing, but I also think that if it took a long time to come to that decision, it may not feel healing for a long time, because you're still going to have things you have to work through when it comes to going no contact, right? And I think about, there's oh God, I can't think of her name. I think it's Doormat Mom or something on here. And I went and watched some of her videos because she's one of those moms who's upset that her kids went no contact with her. And I don't remember the backstory now. It's been a long time. But I can tell you that if I had to go no contact with you and you came to the internet and made yourself the victim, I'm going to say no contact with you. And that's just my opinion. I don't remember all the details, so I don't want to single her out or anything like that. But there is a side of that where sometimes when it happens, and there's another woman I follow, I can't remember her name, but her kids went no contact with her, and she's trying to rebuild that relationship by learning what she did to hurt them. And so I've seen both sides of the spectrum, and I think it is possible for some people. And for some people, they might make a good faith effort and it just doesn't work out. And then I think for some people, they're never going to want to be willing to try. And I think all of those are valid options, because everybody's circumstances are different. And I think that we want to talk about the other side of going no contact as well. There is another side to going no contact. When you start distancing people, you're going to start seeing changes in your mood, in your mental health. You're probably going to sleep better. You're probably maybe going to be less irritable, right? Because especially if you have somebody who's up in your business all the time, you're going to feel better just overall. You might even feel like going out and taking that walk. Like, to me, I always feel like if you're waiting for the hammer to fall, or you feel like you're walking on eggshells, or every time you look at your phone and it rings, you feel anxiety when a certain person calls. Like, you have to think about, what could I have instead of this? What could I have instead of this if I put a stop to this situation? And I think going no contact is like the extreme of setting boundary. You know, you're setting that boundary for yourself. And you can start to build a chosen family. And that's what I was talking about earlier with Married Mama of 4, right? So if you know that there's more than one person that maybe isn't conducive to your mental health or your physical health, you can start building your community now. Like, oh my God, I recognize that actually what I want from my family is support. People who are going to hype me up when I need it. People who are going to keep it real with me when I need it, right? People who are going to be honest and open with me regardless of the circumstances. And I'm not saying we have to be in a bubble or a vacuum and always, rainbows and fucking butterflies and stuff. But if we're in a community of people that we can trust, that are going to have our back, support us, hype us when we need it, and tell us the truth when we need it, even when it's uncomfortable, we can start building that community. And then when we start building that community and we start getting those things, right, we start seeing, oh my God, this is actually possible. We never want to think about what we had before. One of the most powerful shifts is, and this is happy and over 21's area, this is an affirmation, okay? You're still worthy of love, even if the people who were supposed to give you love didn't. You're still worthy of love, even if the people who were supposed to give it to you didn't. What do you guys think about that? Because my dear friend who I met here on Tiki Talkie said to me, why do you struggle with positive self-talk? And I think you gave a great example of that, right? Because if we've been torn down enough, whether from our own words or from other people's words, it's really hard to say, I am still worthy of love, even if the people who were supposed to give it to me didn't. Especially if you had a childhood where maybe love wasn't modeled, so you don't really know how love is supposed to feel to know that you're worthy of it. If that makes sense. So I think I might have kind of asked you this earlier, Tara, and not to pick on you, anybody can answer this, but if you've gone no contact and you look at your mental health then versus now, however long it's been, would you say that overall you have seen that you're in a better mood over that period of time?
Well, I'll say yes and no. But I still get depressed, and there are days where I don't want to go out of bed. Now, whether it stems from me, well, sometimes it does. Sometimes I have regrets. I have no regret in what I'm doing.
Right. So not having to hear those things now probably makes you feel like so much better, right? Because it's condescending to hear. What?
I'm more productive.
Yes. Yes. Right. And I think, and that's the other thing too. You actually just brought up a really good point. We don't air our dirty laundry. That tends to isolate people. And I get it. You don't want somebody to come on the internet and be like, you know what so-and-so did to me. I get that. Why is it not okay to tell somebody outside of the family something that you don't like, right? And I think to me, and I think that we can go into deeper issues with that altogether. But, I think that is another form of healing that we have to adjust to, is understanding that it is safe to go say, hey, like, I'm not getting support there. I need your feedback to bounce it off of you because, I don't know if that makes sense at all. You're the first person in your family to say, we're not going to pass this trauma down anymore. Want to be the brave person, the person that's changed. And I will say, I think the younger generation is getting a lot of resistance from, not all, but some of the older generations, because we really are no, we're not just going to shut up and go away. We are going to form our own opinions. And I think that sometimes generations have this unspoken conflict because things have changed so much between when they were growing up and when we are growing up. And I think that's why you have not an entire generation, but people from another generation saying, I can't believe that, Gen Z will just cut off their family and stuff. And I'm not picking, just as an example. And it's is that really it though? Or is it, there's more to the story. It's not, people don't just wake up one day and say, I don't want to talk to you anymore without good reason. Most of the time, trauma doesn't want to let you go easily. And that's why I brought up the generational cycles, right? The one thing that we hear all the time is, well, I didn't get that, so why should this generation get that? When it comes to especially certain things politically, right? That's trauma. Well, I don't want anybody to have a little bit better chance at life than I did. And the reality is it wouldn't really be any better, but they're just so busy arguing against something that's so silly, Trauma doesn't like to let you go easily. If you have had to deal with somebody guilt tripping or gaslighting you, and then you go no contact, you may still struggle with guilt tripping and gaslighting yourself in that process. You may feel especially depending on how much the manipulation has a hold on you, right? So, if you've been told you're selfish or you're ungrateful or you're dramatic, you might have to really fight hearing your own head tell you that. It can be a challenge. Now, it sounds like just from what I'm hearing with most of the people who have had to deal with going no contact, that everybody's kind of in the same boat. No, I was kind of pretty much ready for it to be over, right? I felt relief by the time I made the decision, but some people who might still be struggling with that decision, it might be a harder journey for them. So that's why I like to cover all of that. Oh, I love this. Okay. You cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. You cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. And I think that is, you can carry that across so many different things. As somebody in recovery, I feel like that can apply to recovery. You can't be around people who are doing the same shit that you used to do and get better. It just doesn't work that way. What is the phrase or tactic that people have tried to pull you back in when you want to escape toxicity, whether you've gone no contact or not? What is a tactic that your family has tried to use to pull you in?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not that big. It won't happen again, or you're kind of overreacting. We're blood. I didn't mean it that way. You just took it out of context.
Yeah, I was joking. That's the one I hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's common too. And I think sometimes maybe we get pulled back in because the way I think of it, or I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that experiences this, but like talking to somebody and then a third party will come and be like, oh, so-and-so is not doing so well and you should whatever. Doesn't understand, or sometimes you get inadvertently dragged into somebody else's shit because someone else is like, oh, you should go see them, they're sick or whatever, right? And I want to give my example, but I'm not going to. It's too long of a story. But I think sometimes that can have an impact on pulling you back in, right? Especially if you hear something tragic. And, it is okay, no matter what decision you make. And I think it's really important to remember, no matter what decision you make, your feelings are valid. So if you decide, I don't want to go see somebody because they're sick or suffering, because sometimes that's a manipulation tactic too, right? If you decide you don't want to see somebody and then they pass, your feelings are still valid. You don't have to feel guilty. Especially if they have a history of doing stuff like this. I have a grandmother on my father's side who, anytime the world isn't going her way, she gets sick. She's sick. Oh, she's really sick. There's another person I know, not related to me, but they're dying. They're always dying. They've been dying for 15 fucking years. And I realize now they might really be sick because they're not nice people, but it's also a manipulation tactic because they need the attention. They need you to feel sorry for them. And I think we have to be very, especially if we're early in making the change of not talking to them anymore, I think we have to really think about discernment. And that's why I had said earlier when we first started, if you think you might go no contact, make sure you've exhausted all options first. Because the last thing you want to do is go no contact and then feel bad about it and then start talking to them and be all over the place. You need to make sure that whatever decision you make, you're certain in that decision. God, I really love that. I'm going to say it again, guys. You cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. Like, that gives me chills just saying. And I don't know why that's impacting me so much tonight. Maybe because I needed this talk. All right, so how do you cope with all of the things that come with going no contact? Well, there's different things, and depending on your socioeconomic status and where you live and whether you work or don't work, that can all vary. But I'm going to try to give some solutions for everybody at every level. Therapy, trauma-informed therapy. And if you can't do therapy, find a hobby that is therapeutic. Find something you enjoy. Something where you can really bring out your creative side, whatever that is. Trauma-informed therapy, especially if there was abuse, neglect, any of that type of stuff involved. Support groups. And this is a really great alternative if you don't have therapy. Support groups are great because you can find other people who can probably relate to what you've been through. You can find other people who can connect with you over similar issues or similar struggles, or you can even just sit back and observe how other people have handled things. The other is closure rituals. And this might sound really cheesy, but it is something that can work. Write a letter, burn it, write a letter and put it in the shredder. That way you've expressed the emotion and it's ritualistic of closing that chapter. And it's a way of releasing it and not carrying it with you. Boundaries. Boundaries is going to be the biggest thing that you can do for free, right? And not just with them, but with yourself, and making sure that new relationships, new friendships, new whatever you're encountering, that you're learning to set boundaries and you're learning to communicate how you feel. Don't be passive about things, because I know like sometimes it's really weird, but I know I was a very passive personality for years, and I would just put up with shit and then one day just explode. And it was actually when I started working in a prison when you can't look scared, you know, you have to look Like, you're not afraid. And my friend that I worked with there taught me everything I needed to know about being assertive. She one day came to me, we ended up at another job, and she came to me one day and she goes, I think I kind of like when you're irritated about something. And I go, why? And she goes, because you stand up for yourself when you're irritated. And like, that was like a light bulb for me. And that's when I really started saying, okay, I'm going to have to do this thing that's uncomfortable for me and just start telling people, I don't like it when you say that. I don't like it when you do that. I'm not available for whatever your BS is. And I felt like that was a really great lesson to learn. So it is also okay to acknowledge the what ifs. I don't want you to what if yourself. Well, I'm saying this. I wouldn't want you to what if yourself into oblivion, but it is okay to have what ifs. Write it out. Don't let it just circle around in your head like a PT track. You know, it is okay to acknowledge the what ifs. What if they change? What if they apologize? What if I miss them? You can still honor those feelings without acting on them. You can write about it. Go through the ritual behavior, write about it, and shred it. And coping strategies. What are some coping strategies you can use? Well, I gave you a couple examples now, but another is some sun, exercise, read. We have a couple crafters in here. We have a couple of people who have little hobbies that they love. That is part of coping, but I think that support is going to be your second biggest thing. So you have boundaries, support, and then finding something that you enjoy to do. I love the blurry fingers. Isn't that great? And I think if I had to give myself a piece of advice when it comes to deciding when to go no contact, my advice would be, you don't have to wait until they piss you off the 100th time. You don't have to give somebody repeated chances. So I'm curious if anybody else has a piece of advice that you would share with yourself about going no contact. I guess my thought process is, sometimes you have to remind yourself that you care about it more than they do. They might tell you they care about the fact that you're not talking to them or whatever, but sometimes you care about it more than they do. Because especially with some people, some very selfish people, and we're not going to talk about diagnoses, but there are certain selfish types of personalities, certain types of selfish people where they'll just move on to the next person. And, you know, I like to think of those people as energy vampires. So they'll just move on to the next person. So don't feel guilty, because you should be feeling relief. You should be rejoicing. You know what I mean? So Tara says, preach. Yeah. All right. So culture, religion, and shame. This is really interesting. And there's only a couple more things we're going to go over. Then we can do a Q&A or a general chat or whatever. Okay. So culture, religion, and shame. We don't want to ignore the elephant in the room, which is culture and religion. And this ties back into family structures and family dynamics and ways that we have experienced the world or gotten our view of the world. All of those things are different. And I know that all of those things are different because of my own experiences, right? And I can see my experiences versus what my daughter or my sons or my husband has gone through. Culture and religion sometimes too play a role in people feeling like they have to be loyal, and that loyalty is priority over safety. And I really hate to use this example, but it's probably the most concerning one that I see the most common. And you have sometimes physical abuse or other types of that going on in a home, and you are forced to ignore it, forced to deal with somebody not acknowledging it, and you're told basically that you need to obey your parents, honor your parents. You can't, your parents are always right. Even if they're wrong, they're always right. And I think that those can also play a big role in loyalty over safety, which you've been doing that since you were a child. It can be something that's really hard to undo once you're an adult. And I think it's really important to realize that there may be the possibility that you've been expected to show up for people that never showed up for you. And I think in a lot of ways, this is something we see on a smaller level every day. We'll see people that never show up for us on a smaller level. Not everybody, can show up for us all the time, but you start noticing patterns of who shows up for you and who you show up for. And I always like to say, we don't count favors around here, because we don't, but I do notice patterns. And if I reach out to you multiple times, you don't respond to me, you've said enough. And that's just the way I think. And I've had where, like, I had a cousin I kept reaching out to and she didn't answer me. And finally, she said, I just want to let you know I appreciated all the messages that you've been sending me. I was going through a really dark time and I didn't feel like I could say anything polite to anybody and I didn't want to burn any bridges. I appreciate you reaching out to me. Okay, that's acceptable. That's acceptable because eventually she did come back to it. And we can allow grace for things like that. But I also think there is some truth in some people don't want to see us succeed, or once they start seeing you get a little more successful, you start seeing them less and less. And I think it's really, really important to know that you don't have to always show up for people who don't even try to show up for you. And I think that shame and pressure feed into that discussion of, oh, you're disloyal, or you're not, how dare you cut off your family? Like, we're your family. We're always going to be here. And it's like, but were you always there? So I think that's important too. I want to just say that, like, I was raised in a very conservative home, and I am definitely the black sheep of the family, but that's not as bad as it sounds. My mom has accepted me and all of my changes over the years because she's my mom and I love her and she's wonderful. And I've even, changed her mind on a few things. I would say she's probably more of a progressive than she'll ever admit, and that's okay. But I was raised in a very conservative home where we went to church and, God, spirituality, everything is like a big, you had to obey your parents, you had to honor your parents, you had to do whatever. And that did play a role in me tolerating other people's bullshit for entirely too long. But then once I realized, like, I don't have to let that impact how I feel, it got better. And then I remember thinking, like, is God gonna want me to hold on to relationships that aren't healthy for me just because somebody's related to me? I mean, think about Cain and Abel, right? I think about that story, and he had to be exiled. So if it can happen in the Bible, no matter where you stand religiously, okay? I use examples just because I was religiously indoctrinated as a child. But if in the earliest times, that's a great example of no contact. And I don't know. To me, it just doesn't make sense to be like, oh, well, God says that they're family and you have to talk to them. Well, when you think about Genesis, Cain and Abel, that was kind of no contact, right? So anyway, I want to, before we go into Q&A or just general mental health discussion, I want to leave you with this. Going no contact is not about revenge. It's not about being petty. It's not about proving a point. It is about saying, I deserve to heal, even if that means that I have to heal without you in my life. It's not about proving a point. It's about saying, I deserve to heal, even if that means healing without you in my life. The silence that follows that statement can be uncomfortable, especially if you were surrounded by chaos and that was your normal. This happens a lot, where if you had a lot of chaos due to dysfunction and then all of a sudden you don't have that chaos anymore, it can be like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, I don't even know. You're so used to being in an anxious state. It's like, how do I relax, right? And I'm somebody who's been dealing with dysfunction, unfortunately, my entire life. And the more I try to separate myself from it, the more it follows me. So I am somebody who struggles with turning my brain off. So I say this as somebody who, that is a battle for me every day when it's quiet and there's no chaos and there's no drama going on. It's some days like, what the fuck do I do now? What the fuck do I do now? So, and if you're still in the middle of it, you're wrestling with, do I need to change this situation? If you're not sure what the right decision is, I want you also to know that you're not alone. And I don't care what anyone else tells you. Your feelings are valid, okay? Your feelings are valid. No matter what they are, they're valid. People can't tell you that you're wrong because somebody hurt your feelings or somebody hurt you. Healing is not linear. And I say this about recovery, but healing is not linear. Recovery is not linear. Pretty much getting better, not being sick, not being in the environment you were sick in, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not an overnight thing. And every boundary that you set for yourself, whether you go no contact or not, whether you just start practicing setting boundaries in your life, that's an act of self-love. And that's all I got, folks. So panel is open. What do you guys think?
Okay.